First of all, thank you all for coming to this afternoon session on This Stuff is Cool, but how can I get my company to do it? Or as I like to call it, businessing the S out of transformative development. My name is Mark Heckler. I'm a principal technologist and developer advocate with Pivotal Software, Inc. Pivotal are the makers of Spring Boot, Spring Framework, Redis, RabbitMQ, Greenplum, Cloud Foundry, huge contributor to Apache Tomcat, and a host of other things. Perhaps you've heard of us. Yeah, a couple of people have. We like to call ourselves a tiny little startup in Silicon Valley, but we try to get involved in a lot of things and do it well. So I blog, not as often as I'd like, but as often as I can at thehecklers.org, my personal domain. I tweet all the time. I tweet very regularly at mkheck on the Twitters. Is anybody here on the Twitters? Okay, good. A couple of you. I also am a member of the slightly older and more established social network called Email. Is anybody here on Email? Okay, a couple more of you. That's good. We only have about 50 minutes here, and that's just enough time to kind of throw out a lot of food for thought and to maybe throw it around a little bit and cover it at a very high level. If you think I glossed over something too quickly, I probably did. I probably feel the same way. Reach out to me, please. I'm only half kidding when I say I live on Twitter. I'm usually there from the time I get up to the time I go to bed, sometimes lying in bed. I check email fairly regularly, but not quite as often as Twitter. So please ping me on Twitter, or if you must, email. It's all good. But we have about 50 minutes here, and that's, like I said, just enough time to get the discussion going. The good news is we have an unlimited amount of time afterward. So if you have any questions, thoughts, things that we'd really like to unravel and unroll to a lot greater extent, please do reach out to me. Happy to talk to you at length about any of this. So with that said, who am I? I'm the author of several blogs and blog posts. I've co-authored one book already and have another one in the pipeline. I've contributed to several others, both code and text. I love to read, I love to write, I love to share. I always feel like the more we all share, the faster we all learn, which seems like a pretty big positive. I've spoken around the world on various development-centered topics. This is a little different, this talk. It's development-oriented. It's not development-specific. But thank you very much for inviting me. This is a fun talk, I think. I always tell people you'll probably either love it or hate it, because it's not... most of my talks, I actually break out an IDE in live code. This, I don't do that. If that's what you're after, sorry, you're not going to get it in this one. But it's probably more important in a lot of ways, and I kind of get into why here shortly. First and foremost, I'm a developer. I use what works. When I find gaps, I try to fill them. Sound familiar? Yep, we all do. I am also an MBA. I got my master's in business administration a few years back. I felt like it would be a good complement to a tech background, a degree. I also, a lot of times people ask me, why an MBA? Why finance? Why this kind of thing? We bring order to chaos on a daily basis. A financial analysis is very much the same thing. It's just a different domain. So chances are, if you like the rigors of development, you'll like the rigors of a solid financial analysis, but it's a different application. The good news is it directly applies in getting your initiatives approved, funded, so on and so forth. As I say many times throughout this discussion, this is not a way to take a bad project and make it saleable to your leadership. This is a way to get a better understanding of what you have in front of you and see if it makes sense. And if it does make sense, to allow you to put it into terms that is their language, the financial types, the management, the leadership, things that they want to understand, that they want to hear, that they can understand better than this will help us deliver faster and do better things. What does that mean? How do we quantify that? We'll get into that. So, again, the objective in all development is to deploy real software to production, software with actual business value. So that's kind of what we talk through. I use one example. I have several others. Again, see me offline if you're interested. So, does anyone recognize this photo? Yeah. Okay, good. It always worries me a little when nobody raises their hand. Please get involved. Okay, good. Okay. Listening to me try to speak Dutch is a lot like listening to a Vogon try to recite poetry. I will not do that to you. So for your safety, consideration of you, I will be presenting in English. You're welcome. Does anyone recognize what this is from, by the way? Excellent. Do you know what year? Didn't know there was going to be a quiz, did you? 2005. Yeah, okay. Nobody gets a t-shirt. I don't have a t-shirt to give, but if I did, it'd go to this guy because he's sitting out front, and these guys too, but anyway. All right. What's that? No. 2005. Yep. Oh, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm sorry. And it was from the movie version, although there are several different radio shows and TV series and all that. So, okay, so again, if you came to this for live coding, which is a lot of what I do, this is not that talk. Sorry, save yourself now. So what is the goal for today? Well, my goal today is to stay as close to a purely fact-based discussion as possible. I hate it when people set up straw men, knock them down, and claim victory. I don't like to do that. I try not to do that. I try to step through things that make sense in a logical way. Sometimes it's not as exciting, but I try to throw in excellent movie quotes and references to make up for that. So some disclaimers. Well, first, I'm human. You'll probably find a few things to disagree with. That's cool. Ping me. Happy to discuss. Maybe there's a reason for my madness, a method to my madness. Maybe there's a madness to my method. We can talk. It's all good. Measurements require assumptions. This is where it gets really uncomfortable because we like to deal with black and white. We like to deal with hardcore yes, no's, binary. We don't have a lot of that. We're starting off this discussion and every discussion when it comes to a financial analysis with qualitative measures. Qualitative measures are what I call squishy measures. They aren't very well defined. Our goal is to define them with some rigor. So we make the assumptions, we state those clearly and quantify them, and always, always, always estimate your benefits conservatively and your costs liberally. Has anyone ever worked on a project where there has been a gross cost underrun? Yeah, I know. I keep hoping. One person. That was a fluke. Enjoy that. That'll be the only time that probably ever happens in your life. You could probably write it down and sell books about it. It just doesn't happen often. So I always tell people, if you estimate your costs conservatively and your benefits liberally, what typically happens is you destroy your credibility. And you may not get a chance to do it again. So if you estimate your costs high and your benefits low, chances are, even if you're off target, you will be in pretty good shape. You'll get a chance to do it again and refine and get better at this. That's the goal, right? To do good things for your company. So the numbers you see are examples. The numbers that I throw up here, please do not take and say, well, Mark said it would be 2 million here, so it's 2 million there. Every circumstance is different. Please, 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 don't take them out of context. Apply an analysis of your own to your circumstances to come up with the numbers that make sense in your case. Again, adjust sensibly for your circumstances. So remember, with great power, excellent, comes great responsibility. Excellent, excellent. Okay, does anyone recognize what this is from? Do I have to ask? Okay, the year 2002. I won't put you through that. So, what's on the agenda? Well, this, by the way, is the sum total of all human knowledge, right here. So if you read these two books, you know everything, and we're done. This is, and I'm kind of half joking here, but this is kind of the domain of most tech conferences and most talks at tech conferences. Stuff you don't learn at Harvard Business School, the stuff that we need to do our job and do it well on a daily basis. That's great. We're kind of diving into the other side today. We're going to talk about some of the things that you would learn in B School, things that help you to analyze and assess initiatives and to make that case to people who control the purse strings. So, really what's on the agenda? Well, we're going to be talking about a term called payback or payback period. This is a financial term. Most of these financial concepts and terms are really not that hard. They just seem a little unapproachable initially, but they're pretty simple formulas, and I show you how to do them with some examples. That makes, examples always help, right? So we'll talk about payback, or how soon you can get your money back out of a project, an initiative. Then we'll talk about perhaps a more complete measure called net present value, or NPV for short. There are other financial measures, but NPV is kind of considered the holy grail, at least at this point, and I go into reasons why as we go through that as well. We talk about quantification, what it means, how you can take things that are very ill-defined and turn them into some kind of a number. It's not a precise thing. It's not an exact science. It can take forever to do that if you don't time box it. So your goal is to do a very good job with a certain amount of data in a certain amount of time, and to refine. It's all iterative, and that applies here just as well. We'll base our quantification on well-reasoned and calculated assumptions, which we communicate very clearly so that we can, again, refine them and make them more accurate. There are several steps to go through, but don't panic. Okay, yes, back to the Hitchhiker's Guide. This is Marvin, by the way, the paranoid android. Has anybody not read or watched the Hitchhiker's Guide? Please do yourself a favor. It's really good. The movie is not as good as the books, but it's a lot faster. 2 hours and you're done. And they do. But, you've got several things to recommend it. Zooey Deschanel and Alan Rickman. It's just a real, and Martin Freeman. Yeah, it's good stuff. Good actors and stuff. So, okay, so back to business at hand. Payback. Payback is a very simple and straightforward formula. You take the cost of the project as a whole, you divide by the annual cash inflow or savings, if you're going to, cost avoidance is a thing too, and that results in your payback period. So again, an example clarifies a lot. So let's say you have a project with $500,000 or euros or what have you. It all works the same. That's a wonderful thing about numbers, right? 500,000 in costs. And let's say that produces 200,000 a year in new income. That means you have a payback of 2.5 years. 500,000 divided by 200,000, 2.5. So for that investment, you can recover your investment in 2.5 years. A little bit of explanation is in order. As you might imagine, a shorter payback period is generally better for several reasons. It's more liquid. Your money is freed up sooner for other investments. And because a longer payback means more uncertainty and greater risk. Because of market conditions, right? The market changes, interest rates change, the cost of borrowing, the opportunity costs for other projects that might surface that you've already invested in this and don't have the free capital, things of that nature. And your competitors don't stand still either. So if you come up with a great new initiative that takes you 2 years to implement and has a 4-year payback, your competitors aren't just going to wait and see how it pans out. If it's a great idea, they're going to try to do the same thing at the same time. So you always favor a shorter payback. Typically, under 3 years is preferred. After that, it's a lot of guesswork for the reasons mentioned above. And generally, a payback of under a year is considered an essential project. So if the money's in the bank, typically it's just automatic approval, almost. You know how that goes. So some of the drawbacks, because everything has pros and cons, right? Well, payback is a good measure, but there's no consideration of total value. For instance, what do I mean? If you have two initiatives that are competing for the same investment, one has a 3-year payback. So you recover all of your money from this investment, this initiative in 3 years. But there's no further value after year 5, and it has a total lifetime value of $250,000. Versus another project which takes 5 years to get your money back out of, but it has ongoing value, and the lifetime value of that is $1 million. So which do you choose? And this comes down to your company and the way they assess their investments in initiatives, right? Because some companies will heavily favor a shorter payback. 3 years versus 5 years, no brainer, it's 3 years. Others will look at the total lifetime value. They'll see that 5 years is a little bit further out, there's a little more uncertainty, but it's 4 times the value, so that would be the one to get the nod. This depends on your circumstances. So another drawback of payback, the payback period, is there's no consideration of the time value of money. So what do I mean by that? Well, if I offered to give you, because you're right here in front of me, if I offered to give you €100 today or €100 in 10 years, which would you choose? Today. Okay, well, it didn't take him long, right? Does anybody have a different answer?
With interest rates going negative.
Oh, no interest rate. Yeah. Well, yeah, I see what you're saying, yeah. Good point, but in 10 years, who knows? Money today is almost invariably worth more than money down the road, with certain exceptions. But generally speaking, over the long haul, there's no exception. It's always worth more today. So payback is just concerned with the return of your capital, not the return on your capital. But if you're looking at a total measure, you want to make sure that you get a good return as well. So payback is somewhat lacking in that department. It's a good measure, but it's incomplete. So what's better, right? Well, that's where we start talking about NPV, net present value. I mentioned earlier internal rate of return. That's a kind of a cousin of net present value. But the limitation, or the huge limitation of IRR, is that it uses one single discount rate to evaluate every investment, every time period. With net present value, you can change the rate per time period, which gives you a lot of flexibility. Excuse me. Time to stop for a drink. And yes, this is just water, so. Okay, so net present value demonstrates the value of investment in today's constant euros. So we take the net period cash flow. My light's a little dim here, but hopefully you can see it. Divide it by 1 plus r to the t power, where r is the rate of return for that particular period, and t is the number of that particular time period, and do the sum of all those, and it's NPV is the outcome. So that allows you to break it down by year, or by every 6-month period, or quarters, or months, weeks, days even if you want to, if your circumstances change. It gives you the ultimate flexibility to assess an investment. So again, an example. So let's say we're looking at a project with 1 million in cash flows, excuse me, just went blank. And you divide that by 1 plus 0.05 to the 5th power, where you have 5% cost of borrowing or opportunity costs that you could be achieving through other means, and you have 5 time periods. We'll say 5 years in this case, but it can be, again, 5 semi-annual periods or months or what have you. And you divide 1 million by 1.05 to the 5th power, and you come up with today's dollars, today's constant currency value of 783,526. So it discounts your cash flows over 5 years to today's constant money. So you get a more accurate assessment. This allows you to evaluate different initiatives with different time periods. So if one is a 3-year investment and one's a 5-year investment, you can back those up to today's constant dollars and compare apples to apples. It makes it a lot cleaner than if you're looking at the payback measure going, which one is really better? Oop, I went back. There we go. So another example, because this shows that you can break it up, you can vary it. Let's say that you have different cash flows. It's a ramp up, as many projects are. For this particular initiative, we'll assume $100,000 in new revenue coming in the first year, $200,000 in the second year, $400,000 in the third year. And we'll also assume that as we go through this project, our cost of borrowing decreases from 5% to 4% to 3%. Valid assumption in this case. So if we do the math, we come up with a total net present value of $646,206. Even though we had $700,000 in cash flows over time, backed up to today, it comes back to $646,000, roughly. Make sense? We good so far? Everybody still awake? Okay, good. All right. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of fun stuff, but it's certainly not what you're used to doing, so don't drift off of me, okay? It gets really exciting. Okay, well, don't drift off of me. All right, so some of the inputs and associated challenges. Well, first of all, quantifying qualitative measures, that's hard. That is not, again, that's not an exact science. This is something that you apply a lot of rigor to. And it's always open to some subjectivity. But what you try to do to deal with that is to base everything on solid assumptions and to verify those assumptions. Have people check them, sanity check them, and critique them. Because what I like to do is work with somebody in the financial side of the house. And it's always a little more difficult when you start off, getting someone to say, say they'll work with you. When you come up and say, hey, I'd like you to take a look at some numbers I'm running. And they'll look at you like, you're from IT. Why are you running numbers? Why are you assessing investments? Well, because I want to make this a responsible decision for our company. This is something that is good. We all want our companies to succeed. One, because we like the paychecks, right? That's the short term. That's the selfish interest. But two, because none of us really wants to be a part of something that's a failure. We want something to be successful. We want to somehow contribute to the greater good in some way. And we don't do that by helping our company run itself into the ground, right? So when you work with somebody on the financial side of the house and you show them your assumptions, you may have something like, I estimate this type of thing would save us about 20% of effort or increase productivity by 15%. And they'll look at it and go, I don't think that's so because this comes into play. And you'll say, oh, hadn't thought of that. Really appreciate that. It refines your assumptions, which allows you to get a lot better handle on your project before you even start it. And it also helps get it through the wickets to where you can start it. So some of the things you look at, how would this initiative, one, other than how it would actually affect your day-to-day work, but you'd also look at how it would impact your tech stack and what that would involve. There will be new costs probably for most initiatives, right? Because if you were already doing them, it wouldn't be a new initiative. So it will affect your tech stack in most cases. How would it contribute to recruitment or retention? This gets really tough. Has anybody ever looked for a new position or been recruited to a new position where the recruiter sold you on coming to ancient technology that has no chance of advancing? No. Okay, one person back there who is a masochist. Okay, that's cool. But when you look at taking on a new initiative, you're introducing something new and exciting into your realm, if you will. In many cases, that's something that other companies are doing because it's a good idea, it's a good thing to do, or that maybe you're out in front in your industry. What does that do to your recruitment? What does that do to your team retention? Usually it does good things. How do you quantify that? That's tough. We're going to try to do that as we go along. Because that's something that is often considered an intangible, but there's always a way to assign some value to it. It's not always easy, it's not always precise, but there's always a way. How does it affect the business? I have a couple great examples as we go through, but I don't want to spoil the surprise, so we'll just move on along. Some pros and cons of doing this kind of analysis. Well, first of all, a critical analysis yields better understanding of the inputs and impacts. That's good, because before you embark upon an initiative, you know what you're getting into. For us, that's important, right? More information is good, surprises are bad. It also can provide more objective and compelling justification for your initiative. That's a huge plus, because if you see it as a good thing, one, you'll be a better advocate, but two, you'll have more ammunition to bring with you and help them understand why it's a good thing as well. Some cons. This can be very time-consuming. I mean, literally, you could do this the rest of your working days and never finish it for a single initiative if you didn't force yourself to time box. Because things keep changing. You can always pull in more inputs. You don't have an unlimited amount of time. The world keeps turning. And of course, there's no automatic conversion between qualitative and quantitative measures. So this gets tough. It's not easy. It's not always comfortable, but it's a con. So caveats. Well, again, time's a constraint. You can't go on forever. You have to box it somehow. Assumptions form the basis of your conclusions. So bad assumptions, what? They lead to inaccurate conclusions. Good assumptions can also lead to inaccurate conclusions if you're not really careful. So you want to provide good assumptions and extrapolate from those carefully. Document your assumptions meticulously. This has several good outcomes. Because when you document your assumptions meticulously, it's easier to spot where you go wrong. It's easier for someone in finance or your manager to look at it and say, okay, that makes perfect sense, but we'll never get that through. Or that's a 2% gain. Don't even list that. It's not worth going into the 3 pages to expand on that. Really highlight this more. That's fine. These are assumptions you need to try to capture and you need verification on to increase the fidelity of your analysis. It also helps do one thing, and I always feel a little guilty for saying this because it sounds like I'm trying to misdirect, and I'm certainly not. But when you document your assumptions meticulously and you bring them to your financial people and say, here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that we can reduce our cost by 7%, increase our velocity of deployments by 30% or whatever. it gives them something to look at and critique. They're no longer across the table from you deciding if they're going to let you spend $3 million on a new initiative. They're looking at assumptions. They're looking at values that you're assigning to certain costs or values you're assigning to certain benefits. And they're on your side of the table trying to work through and refine your assumptions with you. That gives you a lot of advantages. They're no longer across the table from you, for one. Secondly, if somebody else, a peer of theirs in finance, comes and says, hey, have you heard that crazy idea that Mark threw out there? Then Barb in finance can say, actually, I've been working with Mark on that, and it's not so crazy. Let me show you this. What did you just do? You created an ally and an advocate in the finance department because you are working with them, in Barb in this case, to refine good, solid assumptions. That's huge. So be open to discussion, be open to refinement. Don't get parochial about your assumptions. If somebody says you're out to lunch on that assumption, ask why. Fix it, eliminate it, what have you. But don't get defensive, just fix it. So let's run through it. Suit is optional. By the way, I forgot to mention, I always try to dress appropriately for my talks. You know, since I'm talking finance, I had to wear something that bespeaks money and power, right? So Wayne Enterprises. I didn't want to wear a suit, because suits. But this, I figured, close enough, right? Not for this talk. I saved the bat suit for the coding, okay? So if you want to see that, maybe next time. But, all right, so I'm going to consider a migration to microservices. Why? Why this? One, because it's really hard. Why pick on something easy for a talk, right? Secondly, some people have asked, why couldn't you have talked about something else? Maybe a migration to a public cloud platform or something like that. Well, as I mentioned in the introduction, Pivotal is the primary contributor to Cloud Foundry. Now, Cloud Foundry is a foundation-run product, if you will, but Pivotal does sell a distribution of that, as does IBM, HP, so on and so forth. I didn't want this to be seen as a sales talk. This is not a sales talk. We're here to talk numbers. We're here to talk how to build a business case for valid initiatives. If you're interested in those numbers, I have them, happy to share them, but that's not why we're here. We're here to talk numbers. And again, this is a lot more difficult. So we'll be looking at a microservices migration. What will that gain you? What will that lose you? So first, some assumptions about that. Well, typically, we're going to be considering a return on investment driven by accelerated realization of benefits rather than overall business transformation. Not entirely true, because I do point out some areas that a microservices architecture can revolutionize your business, can transform it, can open up new opportunities for profits, profit centers, revenue streams, but that's not the primary driver. Many studies have come out showing reduced maintenance costs. I'm not going to argue those. Happy to send you the links to those studies done by reputable companies, organizations, all good. We're going to assume some of that in our analysis. Again, your mileage may vary, with great power. Increased business opportunities through new APIs. That happens. One of the things that I like to point out is Amazon.com. Has anyone ever heard of Amazon.com? 2015, yeah, a couple of you. 2015, Amazon made more money, realized more revenue and profits, by the way, from Amazon Web Services than all its other business units combined. Amazon is not a bookseller anymore. It's not an online retailer, really. It's a cloud services company, which happens to have business units that sell stuff. But it is, I guess let me go back to when it started. Amazon, when it made the shift to services, it opened up services in the infamous or famous 2 pizza box teams, exposing all functionality as services, breaking it down to small teams as an internal-only move. That was only meant to facilitate better interactions internally. But what it did is allow them to make things more granular and expose services in a way that made more sense in a safer manner to other groups internal to Amazon, and eventually to partners and to customers. So there are real possibilities for opening up new streams of revenue, new profit centers, even profits that dwarf your existing business's profits. So that is a possibility. I don't hammer that a lot in this, but obviously it's there. That's something you want to take into account in any kind of analysis. Selective scaling of only high-demand microservices reduces costs every time because you're scaling what has to be scaled, and you're not scaling a bunch of stuff that doesn't. I like to use the term or the phrase velocity where needed, stability where it makes sense. So you're only scaling what needs to be scaled up and down. Investment. Every investment will require some upskilling, some coaching, some mentoring. Do not shortchange the cost. Do not sugarcoat this. Any good manager or VEP will understand that there will be costs associated with a project. Do not pretend there aren't. Be honest. So, certain expectations. Well, with microservices, we assume small batch sizes, small teams. We break these down based on bounded contexts around the pioneering work by Dr. Eric Evans, domain-driven design. And again, this is kind of external to the financial analysis. I'm just explaining kind of how I'm deriving some of these numbers and benefits, okay? There are API-based contracts for interactions. More functionality is delivered to market or internal users sooner because you're breaking things down at a much more granular level. Typically, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll come into that here in a moment. And you're building the right product because a tight dev loop typically means a tight feedback loop, which means you can't vary from the straight and narrow path quite as badly. Again, certain expectations with microservices, improved quality. You have small modifications versus major overhauls. So that allows you to get much better fidelity and keep it that way. Improved end user satisfaction, study after study shows that because you're delivering better software faster. Small frequent releases expose and help resolve process issues in the small because again, you can't deviate from the spec too badly when you're delivering it in 6 weeks with the same subject matter expert from start to finish. And again, when releases are tiny, well-planned, and well-choreographed events, they can happen at will. Makes sense. As opposed to monoliths. Does anyone recognize this, by the way? I didn't ask earlier, but that was Transformers, right? You knew that, right? Okay. Yeah. Okay, this is Godzilla from the latest movie, 2014, I think? He gets around. Okay, so some assumptions with monoliths. The average cadence of releases of key monolithic apps, we're going to say 1 per year. That can vary. Has anybody ever worked on a monolith that has over a year release cycle? Yeah, we've all been there. Yep. That's not unusual. So I actually, the 12 to 18 months, I shorten it to a year because, again, I like to be pessimistic on what we can deliver and optimistic on, I guess, expect higher costs, reduce the benefits I'm expecting. So we'll say that a monolith that we're comparing against would actually be on a 12-month release cycle. And out of that 12 months, it usually goes something like this. You have 10 months of development before some kind of a code freeze, maybe a month of integration testing and bug fixes, and a month of user acceptance testing, which involves confirmations, course corrections, and logging new requirements. Many times those are real requirements that were logged back then, but we somehow missed the mark, so we're logging them as new requirements. Again, we'll assume 12 months because that's optimistic, and the math works out really easily, which is good for a short, quick analysis. Compared to microservices, again, Transformers, Optimus Prime, the first movie, the only movie that was any good anyway. So the average cadence of microservices releases, we're going to assume 7,448 per day. We all okay with that? Okay, usually at this point, people look at me funny and ask where I got the number. Well, Amazon, actually, I think it was a ThoughtWorks paper. They published the results. Amazon in 2011 stated that they were releasing a new or updated microservice about once every 11.6 seconds. When you do the math, that comes out to 7,448 per day. That's not bad. So if your company is only 1/1000th as effective as Amazon, because we're not all Amazon, right? And we're just kind of getting started. We're not that good yet. But if we're only 1/1000th as effective as Amazon, that's still over 7 releases a day, 7.448 to be precise, which is over 2,500 releases a year compared to 1. That's not bad. So let's assume for this analysis that we figure we can come up with a small project which has a pretty good reach. Good visibility, good payback. So we'll assume that that'll take about 14 microservices to implement. By the way, not to poke holes at anybody or punch them in the eye, but it always frustrates me a little bit when somebody will speak about microservices and talk about we're big, we're all in on microservices. We have 12 running in our organization. That's not a microservices architecture. That's a good start. But that's not an architecture. That's a start. That's just a dipping your toe in. That's just getting things rolling. But we'll assume that it'll take us 12 months to kind of come up to speed, get our people trained, to create our platforms, get everything in place, and to spin up maybe 14 of these guys just to get things rolling on a small initiative. And I break it out. If you say we assume 14 new microservices in the first year and we're releasing 7 a day, that means that every one of your year 1 microservices by the end of the year can average a release about every other day, which is pretty good. So, how much more functionality could be delivered more quickly or more accurately? If you're just looking at your organization and you were able to go from once a year to every other day for some kind of an updated bit of functionality, how much more versatility would that give you? How much more reach would that give you, impact to your organization? If you could approach 0 with missed requirements, or missed opportunities, or missed expectations, how much would that be worth to your organization? If users could have needed functionality months or years sooner, what is that worth to your company? And we all know quite a lot. But let's put some numbers to it. So, we start with some volatile functionality. Anything that maybe your salespeople have been asking for, or customers or end users, maybe product development or engineering have been dying for something, clamoring for something, but they know it'll be 2 to 3 years before it'll see the light of day. So they've gone away and given up. What kind of new functionality could you be delivering if you were able to deliver it inside of 3 months or 6 months? I'll bet you'd have a lot of requests, right? We're going to focus upon producing key abilities. And we're going to define some interfaces in our monolith because nothing comes for free. We have to interact with what we have existing out there, the systems that we have, the data that we have. We're going to assume an average time to get these interfaces live on our monolith of about 6 months. Why 6 months? Again, there's a reason for every number. If we assume a 12-month development cycle, we may be coming in the first part of that or the last part of that, but we'll average it and say 6 months. If we ask for a couple new APIs from our monolith, we can get those in 6 months average. We'll assume an average business size of 500 million in annual revenue. How did I get that number? That's the median size of business in the US. Your mileage may vary. Every country's different, every region's different, but that's the number I picked because it made a lot of sense. A lot of your larger companies are now looking at disruptors. They're worried about this. They're willing to invest in projects like this. So it seems very logical that mid-sized businesses and up would be looking at this type of initiative. The impact of high-demand projects implemented via microservices, I estimated, and I broke this down per microservice. You probably wouldn't do this, but it makes the math a lot easier to read on a screen, so I did this. But if you assume a new project with a net expectation of new revenue of 14 million, and we assume 14 microservices in our first year, that breaks down to $1 million per microservice. Again, just an example. So, costs. We know there'll be some upskilling required for our relevant tech teams. And I'm going to have to push this along because I see we're close on time. So we know there'll be training. We know that your current skill set of your people probably won't do it. We'll need to expand their skill set a bit. That's a good thing, but it's going to cost us some money. We also know there'll be some ramp up. So it'll take some time to get things going. New functionality out will take longer the first time out of the gate because you're, again, tentatively feeling your way along. That's typically offset by avoidance of contextualization issues. When you add a new bit of functionality to your monolith, there's this kind of ripple effect because there's not a lot of segmentation to protect you from doing something to other areas within your monolith. You have, in many cases, unfettered access to other functionality, even data. So typically you see that kind of offset. I've eliminated that from the consideration just to simplify, but you would typically include both of those in your analysis. I've also omitted other things that may smooth or speed the path omitted. If you incorporate certain tools that actually boost your development velocity just from the fact that you're adding tooling, that's nice to have. It's an assumption and a benefit that you want to factor in terms of a cost benefit, but I'm not putting that in there, again, to simplify. Platform cost and interface development, you assume there'll be some new platforming, whether you bring in new equipment or you buy into a certain cloud contract or whatever, there will be additional costs because it's a new project. You have to put it somewhere. And we also don't take credit for the amount of functionality we could have implemented in our existing system. That's not right. So let's say that in our monolith, we could implement this, at least a portion of this functionality by expanding our monolith. Might take a little longer, might be a little harder because we have to, again, contextualize everything and run full unit tests and deployment and acceptance tests on the full monolith. But let's assume that we can get $5 million worth of that functionality into the monolith if we change nothing. So we're not going to take credit for that. We're going to back that out of our calculations. So the numbers look something like this. If we assume for our new project that we get new revenues of $14 million in year one, we assume upskilling will cost us $1 million, platform costs, new platform costs are $1 million, interfaces are about $1 million that we're going to invest into expanding our monoliths interfaces with the, quote, outside world, our microservices stable. And the functionality we could have implemented anyway in the monolith, $5 million. So we subtract that out. We come up with a year one net gain from adoption of $6 million, projected. Okay? Again, these are just sample numbers, but I think you can see where the calculations are going. And by the way, these costs typically are pretty high. I've done the research on that, and again, happy to share that as well. But better to estimate costs high, benefits low. So let's plug these into our numbers. For payback, you take the cost of project divided by your annual cash inflow or savings. That results in your payback period. So if we plug in our $8 million that we're expecting in costs, divide that by our annual cash inflow that we're expecting in year one, that results in a payback period of 6.86 months. Remember I said if it's under a year, it's just assumed it'll be approved, right? It's an essential project. But not so fast. Does anyone recognize this? Original Ghostbusters? I still have to see the new one. I hear I've heard conflicting reports, but I'll have to see it to know. Sounds great. So let's plug this into a little more comprehensive measurement, right? Net present value. There's a summary, again, just to review the numbers. We're going to plug that into our NPV calculations. Oh, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. We have to plot this out so we know what numbers to plug into subsequent years, right? So we'll make some assumptions for year two. We get a little better at this. So instead of 14 microservices by the end of year one, we'll assume maybe we can double our output by the end of year two. That is a pittance of a number of microservices still. But again, estimate your capabilities low. You don't want to oversell. So we'll assume we can get 28 new microservices done by the end of year two, which brings our total up to 42. We'll also assume a reduced impact for this secondary project that we're expanding out to do. Typically, that's not the case. Once your users find out that you can deploy real software that meets a real demand that they have in 6 weeks or 3 months versus 2 years, do you think that they quit asking you for more software? No, all of a sudden they realize, we've got somebody who can deliver now. We've got an opportunity to actually get stuff out there that will respond to the market before the market moves on. So typically you get more opportunities to do big projects, but I'm a pessimist. So we'll assume worse outcomes. And we'll reduce it from $1 million impact per microservice to about $750,000. So we estimate new benefit from this second year project or the extension of the first one at $21 million. Add that to the $14 million that we're still throwing off from year one. Results in $35 million in new revenue from the time we started. We also assume a linear ability to expand the monolith. That may be overly optimistic, but we're going to give it the benefit of the doubt. So we'll assume that we can add additional APIs that we could, have implemented 5 million more in additional functionality in our monolith had we continued on the original path. So we're not going to take credit for that. So year two, we have new revenues of $35 million. Again, we assume we're going to train more people, continue to invest in our people so they upskill. We're going to have additional platform costs because we're fielding more microservices now. We also add more interfaces to the monolith to allow communication with it. And we assume that functionality could have been implemented in the monolith anyway, 10 million worth. So we still come out with a year two net gain of 21 million. Again, projections. Year three assumptions, we blow it out a little bit further. We assume we're getting a little bit better at this. We've had a couple years experience developing microservices. We kind of know what we're doing now. We're also bringing in new team members. We're expanding the stable. So again, we assume by the end of year two, we can double our output. 56 new microservices by the end of year three. Again, this is a pittance. But we'll assume very low because it's very achievable. So by the end of year three, we have 98 new microservices in our stable and growing, running successfully. We again estimate further reduced impact, probably overly pessimistic, but again, be safe. So we'll assume $500K impact per microservice. So 28 million in new revenue, add that to our 35 million that we're still realizing from our microservices we've spun up in year 1 and 2, results in 63 million in new revenue for year 3. We again assume a linear ability to expand the monolith. Again, probably overly optimistic, but we'll give it the benefit of the doubt. We'll assume 15 million of that same functionality could have been implemented in our monolith had we not changed course. So, what do we come up with for year 3? 63 million in new revenues. Upskilling, we're continuing to invest in expanding our team and expanding our knowledge. We have additional platform costs. By the way, this is kind of a hockey stick on platform costs. Doesn't work this way, but again, estimate costs liberally. Interfaces, we're going to assume we're going to continue to expand the interfaces to where we can get interact with and get data from our monolith, and opportunity costs of 15 million that we would have implemented functionality in our monolith anyway. 40 million in net year 3 net gain. So we add it all up. Year 1, 6 million divided by 1.05. We assume a constant cost of borrowing here. Please adjust for your circumstances. Year 2, 21 million, 40 million in year 3 comes up to a total adjusted to today's currency of $61,086,277 for this particular initiative. Right? Good to go. So, some of the factors. Here are the things that you need to try to take into account when you're looking at producing your analysis and business case for your initiative. First, quantifying qualitative measures. That's difficult. Don't shy away from it. It is very tough, but you have to start somewhere. You start by documenting assumptions. And you start making assumptions, capturing them, and assigning numbers somehow to how this particular initiative would affect your organizations, your groups, or your team's work. How much more quickly can you deliver functionality? How many reduced errors you would have? How much reduced rework you would have by hitting the mark more effectively, more quickly, more accurately? I probably should have asked this earlier. Has anybody who's worked on a monolith ever had the case where their subject matter expert left the group or the company even by the time it delivered? Yeah, it happens, especially when you have an over 12-month release cycle. What do you think the odds are of that with a 6-week release cycle? So your chances of hitting the mark right off the bat are pretty good because most times you're going to be dealing with the same person start to finish. And again, it's just one of those little benefits you need to capture and quantify. How would this change impact your tech stack? Positive and negative. What would it cost you? What would it gain you? What would it contribute to recruitment or retention? Because you're now modernizing, you're now doing cool things. And I hate to say that because it sounds like the only reason you do this is, cool things. But generally there's a reason why things come into vogue because they work in many cases. And when they don't, that's why you do the analysis so you can discount it and this wouldn't work here or work well. How would it affect the business as a whole? Could it transform your business? Could it increase profit opportunities for your business? Could it just allow you to be more responsive to the market? So, in summary, remember, whoops, I got a little ahead. In summary, critical analysis yields better understanding of inputs and impacts, provides more objective and compelling justification for your initiative, but please be honest. Again, your goal is not to make a turkey look good. Your goal is to understand what you're getting your arms around and to see if it makes sense. And then if it does, to accurately communicate that in language that the people with the money understand. Document and communicate your assumptions clearly and be open to course corrections because you need to have accurate assumptions and that is what allows you to make accurate conclusions. So remember, this is not the enemy. Their primary goal is to make sure your company does as well as it can financially, which keeps your company going. We all like the paycheck. We all like to feel like our company will have a lasting impact on society. And we can't do that without people watching the purse strings. They are our allies. If you help them to understand why an initiative is good for the company, chances are you're going to get to do that initiative. At least your chances go up dramatically. So, thank you for participating. We're exactly out of time, but please, please, please do reach out to me with any questions, comments, critiques. And again, if I hit something very quickly, too quickly, or skip something entirely, apologies, but let's talk about it. Happy to do so. So, MK Heck on Twitter, mark@hecklers.org. Thanks for coming. Really appreciate it.